everyone. Thank you for jumping on and joining us. Welcome to our webinar today on Teachers Change Lives. We have a great session planned. Just a little bit of basic logistics. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We'll wrap things up about 10 or 12 minutes before the end. And please, as we go through the session, feel free to post your questions in the Q&A. We probably won't get to them till the end, but I think jot them down while you have them in your mind. Everyone in the audience will be muted. The session is being recorded and it is being closed captioned. Everybody who signed up for the webinar, whether they are here to listen now or are not, will receive a recording of the session. And we'll get that to you maybe in a day or two by email after the event. But thank you for joining us today, and let's move on. So we have this fabulous panel for you representing two different new Harvard Education Press books. Cara Furman is an associate professor of early childhood education at Hunter College, and she's a former teacher, and her work involves integrating philosophy and education. She's published a lot, and she is the author of the Harvard Education book you see here, Teaching from an Ethical Center. Elham Kazemi is a professor of mathematics at the University of Washington. So she's the co-author of Learning Together, Organizing Schools for Teacher and Student Learning. We're thrilled that Cara and Elham can be here representing HEP authors, but we're also thrilled that we have two panelists here who are teachers who are featured in these books and have worked with these authors. So Erika Klein is a mathematics coach at Sartori Elementary School in Renton, Washington, and has worked with Elham. And Jia Lee is with us. She is with the New York City Public Schools, and she's a special education teacher and has been for 25 years. She's on the steering committee of the Movement and Rank and File Educators, which is part of the United Federation of Teachers and Black Lives Matter at schools in New York City. So we're so thrilled you can all be here. It's going to be great to hear all of your perspectives, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jessica, for launching us and for Harvard Ed for putting this webinar together. I'm Elham, and we're just going to introduce ourselves by sharing a story about a teacher that has impacted our lives, and Eric is going to get us started.
Hi, everybody. Hi, world. My name's Erika Klein, and this will be my 14th year in ed. I'm mentoring of those 14. This will be my 7th year in coaching. I have taught kindergarten, 2nd grade, 5th grade. I was a literacy coach, and now currently I am a math coach. And educator who deeply impacted me and changed my life would be Teresa Lin. She happens to be one of the co-authors of this book. I came in and had a really rough first year teaching. I came in broken, and Teresa met me where I was at, came alongside me, and was a true thought partner. From sitting next to me and planning with me until I got the hang of things, to coming in and co-teaching, to conferring with me with the kids to see like, okay, did you see this? I saw this. We even rearranged my furniture of my classroom probably 4 times late into the evening that year. She influences my day-to-day as a coach, and it's someone that I want to be like as a current coach. I want to be that support for her that she was for me, for another teacher. And I wish everyone could have that support.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jia Lee, and I'm a special education teacher and have been for about 25 years, as was stated earlier, in the New York City Department of Education. And I could think of several teachers, but the first one that popped to mind that influenced me is also a colleague, a co-teacher I taught with for many years. Her name's Jessica. Huge shout out to Jessica. I had just entered, I think it was my 8th year of teaching, and I had been teaching in more traditional schools. And it was my time working with Jessica and my grade level colleagues that taught me about how to meet students where they are, how to teach from an inquiry-based lens, progressive education models, project-based learning. It blew my mind, and I think I did the most amount of learning as an educator by working with Jessica, and working with my grade level colleagues at my school. Yeah, I have to attribute so much to her, and I'll pass it to Cara.
Thanks, Gia. Um, so I think this is my 21st year of teaching in some capacity. I've taught everywhere from infants, toddlers, and preschoolers at a ski resort in rural Maine to teaching elementary school in New York City, and then teaching in higher ed, first in rural Maine and now back in New York City. So I've taught everything but high school. And the teachers who I'm going to give a shout out to two teachers. These are my third grade teachers. I talk about them more in the book, but Christine Valupas and Amy Vorenberg. We studied the ocean in third grade, and they turned our third grade classroom into as much of an ocean as they possibly could, with sand and water and fish tanks, and they built the curriculum truly around the students. And they made learning meaningful and this intellectually vibrant, sort of fully immersive space. And I feel like I am always trying to recreate and place myself in those kinds of environments ever since. So thank you. And Elham.
I'm actually still in touch with my third grade teacher. I was in England as a young child for a few years, and Mrs. Carter helped me kind of come into my own as a young person. So I'm deeply grateful to her. I wanted to talk about Megan Franke, who was my teacher in 17th grade when I was in graduate school, and who introduced me to the world of children's mathematics. And since then, I've sort of never looked back. I didn't realize that teaching could be completely organized around eliciting and responding and listening and making sense of children's ideas, and that even in mathematics, you could create a classroom full of lively discussion that was about kids' ideas. So I think she helped introduce me to a world of teachers who thought that way about teaching mathematics, and I completely fell in love with it, and uh, still relish the relationship I have with Megan, but also the many, many schools and teachers that I've had a chance to work with as a result of that work. So we want you all to think about the teacher or teachers who have impacted your lives as well, and hold them with you as we engage in conversation together about how teachers grow. Kara's going to kind of explain how we thought about the flow of the webinar.
Great. Thank you. So our books come together, I would say, because of, and actually all of us come together as educators as well, a passion for what Aristotle calls practical wisdom, the knowing in context how to live well and how to act well and how to act effectively and also ethically at the same time. And I think that's sort of how Elham and I initially met, was that we were both kind of obsessed with what does it mean to make decisions that might seem very small to somebody who's not a teacher, but that have deep ethical import for students. And so one example, which comes from Elham's book, is she and her authors talk quite a bit about hand signals and the use of hand signals in class discussions instead of having children use the typical hand signal of just raising their hand. And so just changing how children are entering into a conversation changes the tone of the conversation. So that's kind of how we're coming together, is thinking about how to be ethical and effective teachers. Two other elements that we're bringing is our complete admiration and love and passion for the teaching profession and for teachers themselves, and our deep feeling that for children to do well and be sustained, teachers also need to do well and be sustained, and that our classroom should be welcoming and meaningful places for everybody in that space. And the last thing we want to highlight is that collaboration between children and teachers, and also collaboration between teachers and teachers. That teaching can be really lonely in some ways, because children are great, but we also need our peers. And so that's really a stress for us in this talk. The way we've organized the session today is a little bit, it's like an unpanel in a way, you could say. We're kind of shifting the typical way of doing a panel where each person talks and then the next person talks and then the next person talks. So we are kind of inviting each other into the conversation as we go. And so you can expect that. We are focusing a lot on storytelling, which we see as an important way in which teachers know. We are focusing a lot on thinking in action, and so we'll be reflecting kind of as we go and invite you to do that as well. And then we also really, again, we want to center collaboration, and that's why there's 4 of us kind of going back and forth, and we're each taking different parts of the conversation. So with that, I'm gonna ask the first question, and I had the honor of teaching alongside Jia for a number of years and being a thought partner with her. And I got teary when I heard her bring in Jessica into the conversation, who I taught with actually for even more years. And part of the reason why is that sometimes when you're a teacher, you have to share your students, or always you have to share your students with other people. And Jia and Jessica as a team were the kind of teachers who I always knew were going to take good care of my former students. They were going to take good care of my current students. If I had an idea for how to help one of their students, they were going to work with me to make it happen, and vice versa. I really admired them as a team. They also, for anybody who knows them, are incredibly different people, personality-wise, and in terms of what many of their strengths are. And yet they share a lot of similar values. And so I wanted to turn it to Jia to say, can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Jessica a little bit more? And specifically, can you talk a little bit about how you built trust and reciprocity as you were growing this relationship? And what was a new school for you when you first met?
Oh, thank you so much for that question and for this opportunity to talk more about my co-teacher, Jessica, because I owe her so much. I would say that foundationally, the culture of the school um, had held a lot and continues to hold a lot of trust in the educators. So we on our own, talk to any teacher and we get the Sunday scaries, right? It's, like August or right before school, we get these scaries. And I think that's rooted in so much of our desire and feeling of responsibility for our students. And that means we have to work well with each other as colleagues. And we spent a lot of time on our own, scheduling time outside of even our contractual time, because we wanted to get to know each other well. Um, when we started teaching together, my child was going into 3rd grade. She was so flexible and open. I would bring my child to meetings. Um, we would talk, we would confer, we disagreed, and it was understood that we were going to potentially disagree on things, but it was okay, that we would lean in with an open mind. And as co-teachers with students with various and wide-ranging needs, we agreed to try things out and then talk about it afterwards. And we set aside time on Fridays. There was always a preparation period where we would not talk so much about planning or even about a particular student per se, but just to talk about how the partnership is going. That if we needed to bring something up, that was a space and time, and it was a safe space. And we, would just continually make sure to communicate. And I think a big reason why we're able to do that too is because of the school culture.
Thanks, Jia.
And Erika, will you say more about your relationship with Teresa, who I also know and admire deeply? Give us a little window into why she was such a great support for you.
I'm trying to think of like, man, was there this one thing that Teresa Lynn did for me? But it's honestly just a series of small things. And the way our interactions were so small, but over time, that created this deep trust with one another. So she was always willing to jump in and try it with me. So this, I can identify with Gia around like this experimentation of like, we're gonna just try it. she built that in me because I was pretty broken that year. And so I was like, oh, she's like, let's just try it together. And we wouldn't always be successful. Like sometimes we'd really bomb a lesson, but she was there with me. And we would talk about it. What went well, what went wrong, what's going, like, what did you see the students doing? And she could always pull out a highlight, what students are doing well. And that just built me up. So she was consistent. Like this isn't just like a coach, like Erica's struggling, go model a lesson and fix her. Like she was there alongside me over time. So even when I got more versed in my practice, she would challenge me later in life, and we would do different types of counting collections together and then present on it at conferences. She just always met me where I was at, had taught me how to think, in a sense by caring about what I thought, and always gave me um, agency in my decisions. Like always said, okay, what do you think? Let's try it. And then was right alongside with me. Let's go jump in and try it together. And so it's something that I'm totally trying to carry with. Okay, what would Teresa do? You know, like let's try it when I'm coaching with someone as well. Okay, but there is this one story I have to say. When I was really, really down, so I was like, oh my God, I've never done partial product division before where you like scoop out groups, and it was 5th grade. And I was having a tricky time, and I knew I nailed the lesson because I had kids laughing, about partial products. And then I just look at Teresa and she's like, knocked it out of the park, Erica. And so just even that encouragement, like she was there for the highs and the lows.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing that. We thought that you two, having shared these stories, might want to comment a little bit on what you hear in each other's stories.
I would say that we both have this experience of making a space where we can feel comfortable making mistakes, trying things out that we don't know, risk taking, that we're human beings, and moving at the speed of trust, so to speak, is really rooted in both of these scenarios. And yeah, I would say too, like Jessica knew my family, I knew her family. It's more than teaching is more than just transactional work. It's very relational. And if when the adults feel that, I really believe we're setting up the class and the students to feel that too.
I could also pull out that it's purely collaboration in an authentic way. So like you'd so easily get isolated in our classrooms and to like think by ourselves and get trapped in kind of a cycle. And both of those people like were our collaborators. They were our thought partners. They jumped in and gave it a go with us, and we could reflect on it.
I'm kind of struck by how, did you want to say something, Carrie? You can go if you want to. No. I'm struck by how both of you are giving us a window into how much communication there has to be between two people, and that you're not treating teaching like a script that you have to follow. I think probably the people in the webinar here with us today sort of appreciate how much complex decision making goes into teaching, and that it's both intellectual work and a craft and a calling. It's all of those things together. But by talking together and by experimenting, by being able to be in the same space together, you're making your ideas public to each other and experimenting. That sense of play and joy that comes with making kids laugh over division, which I would say I'm really proud of you for that, but also really caring about how they responded. I mean, I've been in those classrooms with you and Teresa, and I think that you're so oriented to how the kids are making sense. That one of the things that's of ideas, that one of the things that's so important is that we make ourselves open and vulnerable to each other at the speed of trust, which I love that you put it that way, Jia, that you can be vulnerable with one another and come to know each other as real people who are making really complex decisions all the time. Contingent, interactive decision making is sort of the way that one of my mentors, Pam Grossman, would describe teaching. But you experiment with joy and curiosity in making your practice public with one another.
So I once worked with a professional developer who said, she was trying to get people at the school to use a particular behavior management system. And she said, well, you just have the magic with the kids, but other teachers like don't necessarily have that, so they need this structure. And when they said that, I was like a little bit flattered, but mostly felt like, well, no, I don't just have the magic with the kids. Like this is a sustained practice that I've worked really hard to figure out how to how to do well. And when I'm listening to both Erika and Jia talk about these relationships, I'm thinking, well, somebody might think, oh, well, it's just like the magic between these two different people, or like maybe like, there's just a lot of charisma that somebody's bringing into the relationship. And something that I hope I offer, and I know that Elham offers in her work, is not just that we should have not relying on magic, but there are structures that we can put in place and there's practices that we can do with intentionality that are going to make us relate better and more meaningfully to each other in schools. And I recommend you read the whole book for Elham's work because there's so much in there. But one practice that you introduced to me was a practice called teacher timeouts. And I'm wondering if, Elham, you could talk a little bit about that and how it helps sustain the magic of teacher relationships. And yeah.
Well, it fits with the idea that Erika said several times about someone learning alongside you. So I have been a math educator for several decades now, and at some point we tried to like have workshops where we would teach right in with real kids rather than just having workshops or professional development aside from teaching. But what would happen is that, like Erika said, sometimes there was an expectation that a lesson gets modeled by someone who's trying to show like the right way to teach, but there is no right way because everything is dependent on what kids are doing. And so one of the things that happened in this network of schools is that we sort of gave permission to break that norm that we have, that when one person is teaching, other people should only be observing. Because the observers honestly are noticing all kinds of things, sometimes that you don't notice. And so you giving each other permission to kind of pause and jump in and confer while teaching. That often happens when you have a co-teacher, like Gia says, but maybe not in like a professional development context. But it's like, well, who makes the rules? We do. So why can't we make a new rule that says, hey, if we're teaching and we notice something that we want to kind of try out, or we have a question about what to do next and we'd like to confer with our colleagues, we could just pause. And so initially we just made these open spaces, these open pauses to say, if we're together in a classroom, someone noticed something you want to follow up on. But Teresa Lind, again, that same person that Erika described, kind of started calling it teacher timeouts. Not the bad kind of timeout, but like a timeout like you would have in sports where you just need a quick little conferring about what to do next. And it wouldn't mean that you were in trouble or that you were doing something wrong, but it was sort of like, let's take advantage of all the other heads in the room and in front of the kids show that we're also trying to figure out how best to respond to their ideas. So we started just pausing whenever we felt like it, and not enough that it would like disturb the lesson or somehow like make the kids feel bad or anything. In fact, the kids would often even jump in and say, looks like you might need a teacher timeout. Or if we took a teacher timeout and I might ask Erika if she was in the room, should I ask this question or this question? It wouldn't be unusual for the kids to pipe in and say, ask this one, or we should do this next, right? So it sort of made our practice public while teaching instead of just before and after. So you sort of didn't have to say after the lesson, oh, I really wish we had asked this question. It was sort of like, well, if you really wish that, ask it while you're wishing it. Make it happen. I don't know if Erika, you want to say anything else about that, but that's sort of the origin story as I remember it.
Yeah. I can speak to a moment recently with a teacher timeout at this setting. I was with a teacher and I was in their classroom and I was seeing all these incredible things going on and I was new to the school and I was like, I was like, oh my God, where's she gonna go with this? There's collaboration happening. There's different strategies here. Like, where is she gonna go? So I'm like, just trying out. I'm like, what are you gonna do? Like, I see like so many things. She goes, what? I'm like, like, how are you gonna summarize this? This is like, and she's like, what do you mean? And I was just like, oh, I don't think you've ever been asked what your opinion on your thought before. Like I like so I she was like totally befuddled by me asking her ideas. And so it's just like, here's a teacher, she's experienced and she's always been told what to do next, or getting a coaching comment was a negative thing. And so we then debriefed it afterwards. She's like, thank you for asking my opinion. I was so caught off guard by getting being solicited about what I thought. And to me, I was like, oh my gosh, like here's a coach here's a school in a coaching model, and still that teacher wasn't positioned to be a thought partner. So it is really nuanced, these teacher timeouts, but also breaks down barriers. And I think it's super powerful.
And Cara, you mentioned how we first met, because you were doing very similar work, sort of. We didn't know about each other's work, but somehow we were playing around with some of the same ideas in our own respective contexts. So will you tell some of the origin stories of what led you to kind of collaborate in practice with others?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So I, in some ways, chose the school that I worked at with Jia because it did a collaborative model called descriptive inquiry. And that was not happening in the midst of teaching and what was just being described. But descriptive inquiry is a way to describe and notice about both children and teacher practice. So if you're really puzzled with a child, you might decide that you're going to do an inquiry about that child. I was struggling with a child who could write but wasn't writing, for example. And so I wrote a report, a narrative about him in a lot of different characters, thinking about things like his physical presence and thinking about the way he connects with other people and thinking about his interests unrelated to writing and thinking about his passions and all of that. And so it's a way actually of taking a time out from your teaching, although you're not actually like in the classroom when you're doing it. But the school that I taught at, we would sit as colleagues and I would present, and I presented on this particular child about his writing. And everybody would ask some questions, and then people at the end would give suggestions or feedback, mostly less suggestions and more just feedback, things that they noticed. So it was a way of kind of slowing down that kind of conversation of that you might have in the midst kind of timeout of like, well, why did you do what you did? And so that was my background. And just as a spoiler for this child with the writing, one of the things that this process does in the slowing down is it really pushes you not just to think about, what might be effective. Like there's particular lessons you can do that get kids to write, and those weren't working, but to really think deeper about like what is going on with this child as they're struggling with this particular thing. And in that case, Jane Andreas, who I think is in this audience, said, well, this child seems to be a connector and writing is really isolating. And so it just completely threw out the conversation of like, well, you could try this mini lesson or you could try that mini lesson. It changed the whole tone. And he was a connector. And so when we went back into the classroom, I had him sit closer to me and we did more collaborative writing. And we did all these things that drew out his strength, which was that he was a great talker and a great connector and hated the isolation of writing. And so that was a way to kind of get at this thing and get outside the box. So that's a little bit of a long way into it. But when I learned about teacher timeouts through my colleague Shannon Larson, who's also, I think, on this call or this webinar, she said, well, why don't we try this with our college students? And so she and I started doing a version of teacher timeouts with college students just to experiment. And I found that the same kind of thinking that was happening with the descriptive inquiry, where I was noticing something and pausing and getting real feedback in real time that would help me improve my practice, and that I was now able to collaborate with somebody, and so we were less lonely. All of those things that were just so powerful with descriptive inquiry were also happening in teacher timeouts. And to me, that just makes me so happy because as a philosopher, it helps me to think of, well, what are the core things that help us to work better with our colleagues, as opposed to like, let's all go do teacher timeouts now, which maybe we should and maybe we shouldn't, but that's less exciting to me than, well, what is it about this ritual that's helpful? And then what might a ritual be that works well in your school or your context that could get at some of the same kind of key elements?
Yeah, exactly. We're not trying to say that everybody should use a particular strategy just to uh, just to use it. But I think underlying so much of what we've talked about so far is what authentic collaboration looks like and what does it mean to work on the craft of teaching. And when educators or instructional leaders get to really think through and puzzle through what they're seeing, like with the descriptive inquiry that you described, and try to understand the experience that students are having in our class, because we teach for students, not for ourselves, then that is a really important thing. And it can happen in many different ways. So we want to transition to sort of talking about the centrality of students to teacher learning, that it's not just about teachers collaborating separate from their students, but their students' ideas and experiences are central to everything that we can imagine and do in response to making their educational experience better. So Gia, if you don't mind, we'll start with you maybe to talk a little bit about what it means for you to learn alongside your students and not just your adult colleague.
Well, yeah, thanks. I had to shift. I think it was somewhere in my fourth or fifth year of teaching. And I think that's kind of a number of years for any educator, where they start to feel like the ground is under them. So, and figure out their pedagogical ways. And something that shook me was the things that were being told to me by my students and the ways they were experiencing it, either through what they were sharing or behaviors, even that really stood in my, both books talks about, especially Cara's book, about feeling things in our bodies and empathizing with how students are feeling in their bodies during these lessons that we're crafting or these educational experiences and being really attuned to them. Because isn't that the purpose, right? The purpose is for them to learn. So I had to be a student of my teacher, a student of my, a teacher of my students and a student of my teachers, students, sorry. I'm totally fumbling that. But learning from them, I think, essential. And one time that I really feel like it stood out to me as I was teaching fourth and fifth grade with Jessica, and that year we were doing an immigration study. We learned about why people move, what are the push and pull factors, what happens when people arrive, what are their experiences like, their challenges, their hopes and their dreams. How do they make their way? And community is such a big part of it. Where I teach in New York City, there's a large population of students from Puerto Rico. And that was interesting because a lot of not just our Puerto Rican students, but students in general didn't know that Puerto Rico is a Commonwealth of the United States. And what does it mean to move from the island? Is that considered immigration? And the same thing for people who were enslaved. So I conferred with Jessica and I said, maybe there should be a group that just studies what it means to be Puerto Rican in the United States, in the mainland United States, and what that could mean. And these are 8 to 10-year-olds. I never learned about this, but they were asking the questions. What does this mean for us? They had guiding inquiry-based thought processes and came out with an amazing project that they presented to their classmates at the end of that study. And I really feel like one thing as educators, higher ed to early childhood, is that our pedagogy, our ability to have some control, working over the means of curriculum planning, unit planning, things like that, is innate in our labor, right? I have a labor background, and that this is part of the work that we do. And unionism requires that we have some control over it. And I think for us, our profession needs to at some point like think about and consider what that means in the midst of like these practices that we're discussing. And really at the core of it, rooted in how we work with our students and listen to them. Wondering maybe Cara or Erika?
Erica, why don't you jump in?
On it. So similarly, I think when we actually listen to students, our instruction gets so much more effective and actually culturally responsive. So similarly, Gia, it involved an original, it involved a curricular text. It was about owling in New England. And I worked at a school in which most of the population was Somali and immigrated from Somalia. They were supposed to hoot like owls, and we're supposed to really dive deep and do some literary language development with them, and talk about the crunching snow. And then I'm listening in and I turn and talk to the students, and they're like, Miss Klein, like, what's owling? And I'm just like, oh my God, like this is ridiculous. Like this read aloud doesn't reflect my students, and it's how are we supposed to do all this intense literary work when there's a background that doesn't even connect? So I was able to bring that scenario to my grade level team and collaborate on evaluating our curricular texts, and do they actually match our student population, and how is that impacting engagement? And so we did like a little research around our curriculum around, okay, who's being reflected and why, who's missing, kind of those windows and mirrors conversations around what curriculum is being presented. And so I think because we were able to listen to students, we were then able to make a better curricular decision, and guess what? Engagement went up. Cara, don't you have a similar story around student learning?
I do have a story. I'm going to take it actually a little bit away from curriculum, which is around discipline, and specifically what to do when children are challenging your ability to teach, their ability to learn, other children's ability to learn, which happens all the time. And I'm not going to tell that much about a specific child. But when I started teaching, I came into a culture where children had timeouts, and timeout, at least in New York public schools at that time, usually looked like either a chair kind of adjacent from where everything else was going on, or you would send the child to a partner teacher who you trusted, maybe somebody like Jia, or for really big things, you would send them to the office, or they would be picked up from the office. Anyway, I started teaching that way. My timeout spot had these little magnets actually in front of it, because I sort of was like, well, maybe they should have something to do in the timeout. Early in my first year teaching, the kids gasped and they said, it says F-U-C-K, Cara, in the magnets.
Uh-oh.
Now, I knew exactly who had done that, because it was the only child I could think of who had recently had timeout who knew the CK spelling pattern and had like the guts to do that, basically. And so I was like, okay, the magnets aren't necessarily doing what I want, or maybe they are, I'm not sure. Anyway, fast forward. I felt very strongly that having a break is important, processing your feelings is important. But I was very ambivalent about the isolation of the timeout chair, and that it's sort of stigmatizing, and kids don't feel like it's a break, they feel like it's a punishment. So at some point, I was working with a yoga instructor. It was like an initiative that the school had, and they were doing yoga in the classrooms. And she had this peace mat. And she said, anybody who wants to stop doing a pose can go do the peace mat. And at about the same time, a parent got me this really beautiful rug that I didn't quite know what to do with in the classroom. It was like this tiny little rug that could fit two kids. And so with the peace mat in mind, I went to my students. I said, I don't know if timeout is really working for anybody. But I do think we need breaks sometimes, and it's really good. What if we had a peace rug? And the kids were like, yeah, that's great. Like they were excited about it. it completely shifted the process of timeout because now the kids wanted to go sit on the rug because it was like beautiful and it was cozy and they could go there with a partner. And for about a week, like everyone was taking breaks constantly on the rug. But slowly over time, the peace rug became a place that kids could go. And so for me, that's an example of a time when the kids kind of pushed me to think differently about something. And I slowly, I mean, this was the process of many years and it keeps going, and I'm going to stop this story. People can email me for the rest of the story about the next iteration. But it took years for my practice to evaluate and calibrate from what I truly believed, which is that kids need breaks but shouldn't be embarrassed, and being able to enact that with really small changes in my instruction that were big. Um, so I'm going to turn it to um, Elham, who's going to talk a little bit about our stories together, and then, yeah, that's where we'll stop.
I guess I'm struck by each of our stories that we've just shared, what it takes to notice what's happening for students, and that actually they're not shy to give us messages. You got a particular kind of message through your magnets. And
Mhm.
but that if we listen carefully, and sometimes we're so busy trying to design our lesson, but that it was that like moment in the turn and talk, Erica, that the kids are like, wait, and it kind of makes you, it stops you short, right? To pulls you up short to have to think about, wait, what's going on here, and how, what am I doing? And what are the kids getting out of this this effort that I've orchestrated, and maybe following their lead and what it is that they want to learn, even if, like in Gia's story, it might be something that you don't know very much about, but that you can take risks with your students, for them to really see education as an empowering experience, that they can play a part in changing their classroom community and what they learn and how they learn it.
Well said.
So,
Gia, I think.
yeah. What makes a school culture that allows teachers to do this kind of creativity?
Yeah, that's a great question, I think, for all of us at this time. Um, and I'm just, forgive me, I'm also looking at the Q&A a little bit just to get a sense of who's in the room. And I think generally there's a concern about making sure that, educators are accountable or schools are accountable to students. And that's been a big part of the framework. That can lead to a management style in schools that's very top down, undemocratic at times, and create and breed cultures. And I've worked in them. I've worked in schools where there's fear of speaking out, or people don't want to collaborate for whatever reason. And I think a question about how to shift that. And in both of your texts, Cara and Elham, you talk about very practical things that we can do together. And I know I am already thinking about the first things I want to do when I get back to school. I start school on September 2nd. And thinking about the question I want to pose with my colleagues in a space, like it could be our first meeting together, offering to support, in our professional development team or instructional leadership teams. A question that we pose to everyone that we can all respond to together, like, I think this is a question out of Elham and your co-author's books about what's one of the first experiences of learning that you had, and what was that experience like? It's something that was new, or watching someone else. And I do wonder how people feel that something that they could do tangibly with one or two other people to start, potentially, to shift the culture in the world that we live in, where things are becoming more mandated, curriculum, AI, ed tech. I know this is happening in higher ed as well. Been talking to a lot of folks, including people here. And then the constraints, policy constraints. How can we, as educators who know and want to do this work deeply with our students and with each other, how can we shift that? And I think that there are tips from both texts. that can lead us to answers. And it can start off with things that are very small. I don't know if Erika, maybe you have something that you want to add on.
I was just looking at Jessica on mute. Are you?
Sorry, yeah, I didn't unmute. I was just thinking we have a lot of questions in the Q&A, and are you all ready? Would you be comfortable just moving over to the Q&A? I can read out some questions. Thank you for catching that, Erica. I was like, darn it, I hate when that happens. So we have a question here. I love this question. I deeply appreciate the idea of meeting students where they are that you mentioned at the start. How do you as teachers identify where students are? And how or when do you know when you've got it right and that you do indeed actually know where they are? Such a great question.
I'll start that one. Listening, I think, is the key, is just having a curious stance, and then giving yourself opportunities to listen. I think a lot of the beginning of year expectations, it's a lot of teacher talk, but if you actually give space for kids to talk and you to listen, you're going to see not only who they are, but form those connections and start that community. So I think get curious and start listening, and that's how you'll know where kids are at.
A great answer. Should we move to another question? Or Cara, did you want to say something on that?
I was just gonna say too, like building rituals around listening too. That yeah, like we need to be listening. And whenever I work with teachers at any master students or in-service students, and I say like, when was the last time you like really sat and talked to a child? They didn't. And actually, like if I think about when did I really talk to my child today, like I don't know if I did either. So like we need to have these places where even if it's 2 minutes where you just sit and ask questions and then you ask follow-up questions or you play with blocks because you don't want to put them on the spot, like you need to sort of plan for that. And I used to in my classroom have a list of all the kids and I'd be like, wow, I haven't talked to so and so for a while, because some kids end up kind of becoming invisible to you.
Can I add also that I did a lot of work on what assessment means, and the Latin root assis means to sit alongside, and literally listening, taking notes. Sometimes I'll hover around my kids, like similar like Cara, I have a little notepad for each kid, and I'll just jot down what they noticed in conversation with another student, but also building in regular community conversations in the meeting area, for example, around a question and having norms around that. I jot those, their little responses are just nuggets of wisdom and enlightenment. And I write that down, and it often leads us down the road of different learning projects.
To make this concrete, one thing we do in math a lot of times is to ask kids what's making sense to them about a strategy, but then also to compare their strategy with another one to see if what they think about ideas that are the same and different between one way of solving a problem versus another. And that often, again, by listening to them, helps you see what questions they have, what they feel solid about, what they're unsure about. Even debriefing with kids after a discussion. How did it feel to share your idea? How did it feel to try to make a connection to somebody else's ideas? Help you see how they feel as like a member and participant in the community.
I love that sort of listening, asking questions, and I love the idea of just very consciously keeping track of who you are in conversation with the most and jotting down their ideas. There's a question here that I think that goes to something that I think is really common, which is the sort of a fear factor. This person writes, I find that new teachers don't always have the skills to collaborate with a co-teacher or are afraid of feedback because they perceive it as criticism. As a faculty member in teacher education, what are some ways that I can prepare my students for the kinds of collaboration and honest conversations that you have been talking about?
I can start. I did go back to school to get a leadership degree in education, and I focused on ICT partnerships. and how you foster them. And there are protocols that you can do. You sit with a co-teacher before you even start the school year, get to know them. There's a series of questions about educational philosophy, so you can get to know each other's like tendencies. And then you talk about concrete things in terms of routines and procedures in the classroom, things like homework or bathroom pass, down to those things. And then how curriculum is planned and how do we give each other feedback. Talk to me about like what your idea of, positive feedback is, and I'll tell you mine. And I found that working in schools where there's already a culture of that and everyone comes in knowing that there's a culture and a set of ground rules or norms, protocols, you have it, it takes away some of the fear, um, that we're kind of grown up used to, depending on your household even. So there are different ways, and I highly recommend looking at some of the things in the books here.
Anyone else on that one? Yeah, Erika?
Sure. Yeah, I kind of am reading into that a little bit. I think feedback and negative, like I think there is this association that we tend to have that feedback is negative versus like, and I think it's a lot of it has to do because it's final, like it's at the end. And I think we spoke to about kind of like, or I got an email from my supervisor after the whole experience is over. So both the authors talked about interrupting that idea of we don't have to wait till the end. We can, in the moment, talk to one another and do this together and collaborate with one another. And that's feedback. So I think expanding what feedback is and defining that together is it's not just this final negative thing. It's like in the moment we're thinking together, we're having feedback back and forth. It's not just me to you, but it's a collaboration.
To follow up on this, oh, I'm sorry, Elham, did you want to say something, add something?
Well, I'm like maybe now in my third decade of being a teacher and teacher educator. And so I have to think a lot about how to flatten the hierarchy as someone who like does know a lot, but doesn't know everything. So sometimes what I do is I pick something that I don't know how to do very well. And I really don't have very much experience with it. So I will have authentically real questions and we'll try to teach with it together so that I can show that, look, I have questions and I'll ask them. And it's okay to ask them. It's okay to say, I don't know, or I'm not sure how this is going to go. And you also have practical ideas and wisdom to bring into the experience. So you have to sort of think about how to flatten the status hierarchy that exists between you as the teacher and your the early career teachers you might be working with.
Do you feel like this is another question in the Q&A, do you feel like there's a difference in the way you provide feedback and respond to feedback when you're working? We've been talking here about sort of one-on-one interactions. What about when it's a group situation, groups or teams of educators? Is that different?
Cara tells so many good stories about her class.
Thank you. I can jump in there. So the descriptive inquiry that work that we did was as a group. You were gathering as a whole staff, and I think it really matters. I guess a few things, in this piggybacks on the last question. I think we need to start from someone's question. And when I offer the question, I'm much more interested in the answer than if you come in and tell me what's wrong with me. And after many, many years, I'm not quite there at 30, but after many years of doing teacher education, usually people's questions are the same question that I probably would have asked them myself. I think that really helps. And in a group setting, if somebody is bringing to the conversation what they're comfortable with, so they've written about the student, they've shared the part of the relationship that they can talk about publicly, that already sets the tone for sort of respecting what somebody wants to bring to the whole group. And then really being very thoughtful about how you can position that person as a knower, and again, kind of flatten the hierarchy when you're giving feedback. So like, instead of saying you should do this and this and this, or like I would do this and this and this, you can say like, here are some things that I'm thinking about when I hear you talk about that child. And then it's, again, with the descriptive inquiry work, it's always on the teacher to decide which thing they are going to do. And there's no accountability after, in the sense of like no one's checking a box to make sure they went and did that. So there's this opportunity to say, okay, Gia, like you just learned all these new things about your student. Now, like, what are you going to go and do? What stands out to you as meaningful out of this conversation, as opposed to what's my, as a admin coming in or something and saying what someone should do?
Can I add one thing about the descriptive reviews? Would be it could be about a student or an area of practice, and I've presented on different areas of practice. And being in participation for like Kara's, for example, she's posing a question, but it could also very well be a question that many of us in the room are also holding. So it was very helpful for everyone. And it wasn't just the teachers that would participate, it would be the paraprofessionals, related service providers who have insight with certain kids or areas of our practice. That, you know, and that definitely, we sat in a big circle. That's the general shape. And it literally takes that pyramid top-down structure and flattens it, as we were talking about, flattening that hierarchy.
I think we have to wrap up now. But this has been so great. And I think what I take away from this is it's all about collaboration and communication, right? It's about creating an environment where that is supported and encouraged. And it has to be encouraged amongst teachers and trainers and teachers and students, and that you build these experiences through openness and some vulnerability and willingness to put yourself out there and hear, listen, and adapt and change. And that is so much to ask. So I admire the work that all of you are doing and that all of the teachers in our audience do, and the challenges you face every day, and the opportunities that you take from those situations and turn into positive learning environments for students. So thank you for all that you do. And thank you for being here today. This has been so great to have you here. And we're so grateful to have your involvement, to work with you on these projects. Thank you for that. I think we have on a next slide, we have there's been a lot cited from these two books that we had represented here, and we really hope that you will check out our website and use this discount code HWEB30 to get a 30% discount off any purchase that you want to make on our site. So we hope that you will take advantage of that. But we thank you for being here, and we will follow up with you with recordings. And good luck in your school years, and have happy academic years 25 to 26 to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you. Bye.